let's start off by introducing our panelists. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves because it's hard to gesture over webcam, and that way you can get a feel for their voice and who they are. We'll jump into some questions. Christine, let's start with you, and then Cody and Peter.
Hi, I'm Christine. I'm CEO and co-founder of Honeycomb. For anyone who isn't familiar already, Honeycomb builds observability tooling to help engineers understand what their code is doing in production, whether it's investigating failures or incidents, or just proactively asking, what is my code really doing out there?
Awesome. Hey everybody, you've got Kobe here, one of the co-founders of Radar and the COO. And Radar is the leading geofencing platform. Essentially, we're a developer tool for PMs and mobile engineers who want to build geofencing and get there faster in a privacy-first way.
Hey, I'm Peter, co-founder and CEO at Segment, and we are the leading customer data platform. So we help companies manage all the customer data being collected across all of their different mobile apps, websites, etc. And we got started as an open source library about almost 10 years ago, 8 years ago. We're about 550 people today.
Great. Thanks for the intros, and maybe to give a plug to help ground you. So Segment, of course, is a much larger company than Honeycomb or Radar. Honeycomb has 50 people, Radar 35 people, raised a similar amount of money. And what we're going to talk about today is, of course, how you arrived at the sales motion you have today and how that's evolved over time. So let's level set for the group and have you share with us how you started selling and how you sell today. And then we'll dive into further questions on how you got from point A to B. Kobe, why don't you start for us?
Sure, happy to kick it off. So early days of Radar, we started the company about 4.5 years ago. Early days of Radar, we were 2 people for the first year. It was just my co-founder, Nick and myself. And basically we played, I played AE, account executive and sales rep, and he played sales engineer in a lot of our early deals. And we basically tried a few different motions before landing on kind of a free self-serve tier, and then in enterprise kind of more top-down motion before we actually hired sales reps. So we waited about 2 years until we were at roughly $1 million in ARR before we said, okay, we feel this is repeatable. We actually know the sales ins and outs. We're comfortable with it, and it's time to bring on outside help to help us move faster.
Great, you kind of landed in this these 2 motions, the free bottoms up and then a direct selling. Christine, are you in a similar place, and where did you begin?
We're in a similar place. We began a little bit differently. My co-founder and I met at a company that was all about the bottoms-up developer love, Parse, if anyone remembers it. And the thing that we saw there was that at that company, at that offering, our customers would often outgrow the bottoms-up entry point. And we knew that with Honeycomb, given that we were helping people understand production systems, as systems become more complex, as customers get larger, the problem that we're solving becomes more important. So we knew that early on, there was absolutely the opportunity to start larger, to leverage the relationships that we had with companies in the Valley, to really get it on the ground floor with something substantial. What this meant is that we spent the first couple of years kind of building out a prototype and doing the very, hey, we know, like, we've gotten beers so many times. I know the problems that you have. Let me show you how this thing can help you. It's not totally polished yet, but let's get you using it. We were able to build that out and get that going. But ultimately, we're product people. We're engineers. We wanted to test bed to iterate on quickly. And given that we defined observability, and we're trying to get folks to leave traditional logging, monitoring, and APM behind, we eventually realized, hey, yeah, we're working these relationships, we're getting these larger deals. we also want as many people to try it out as possible. And so we sort of backed into the bottoms up motion as well. Introduced a self-serve motion, saw it grow roughly proportionally with our top line revenue. And now we've got this sort of healthy balance where we're paying attention to both.
Awesome. And then Peter, yours is a little different, right? You started out with this open source project.
Yeah, we started out with Analytics.js as this open source library, and we thought one of the reasons I was actually against the original idea is I thought it's already open source. Like, how are we going to sell anything here? And it turned out that the open source version of Analytics.js didn't really solve the problem, because you really want to get the engineer out of the deployment loop. And so to do that, you really need to have a SaaS offering where Analytics.js is hosted, and where a marketer can sort of push buttons in a web UI to turn different tools on and off as far as receiving data. So we, even now 8 years later, very few people actually use Analytics.js. There are some big companies like Uber that use it under the covers, and some other platforms like Shopify that use it under the covers. But for the most part, if people are going to use Analytics.js, they use it via Segment, the SaaS tool. So we started by just giving it away for free, because we were just focused on adoption. We'd had this really brutal first year and a half of like not building anything that anyone wanted. And so we decided to just give it away for free. People started adopting it. And then we started to get up the guts to actually ask people for money to use it. And I remember it was a big deal. We like hand emailed 60 people by hand asking if they were okay paying $10 a month for this thing. And then over time that morphed into, oh, actually there's real value here. And there's some funny stories here on how we figured out what the value really was, but eventually worked our way up to 5, 6-figure, now 7-figure contracts per year. And over time kind of matured a sales team. So it went from me selling, which I was terrible at, to me being the sales engineer with one sales rep, to then being a small sales team with dedicated sales engineers, to now today we have, I think about 80 to 90 account executives, and then another 100 or so supporting people in sales development and sales engineering and sales leadership and so on.
Let's talk a moment about that transition from founder selling to maybe professional selling. Kobe, earlier you mentioned that you had some experience selling, and you talked about when you kind of figured out to make that switch, and Peter alluded to it as well. How did you know when to make the transition, and how did that proceed?
I think for us, we started to just feel real market pull where we couldn't service, as kind of a team between me and Nick and then 4 or 5 engineers, like just couldn't service the inbound at the point. And so there was enough healthy pipeline that we weren't working it properly. And so, for us, that was sort of a signal that it was time to hire our first sales rep. And I think it took us a really long time to find that person. We actually found someone. Her name is Caitlin. She's still on the team today, and she's amazing. I think the first sales hire for all of these companies, whoever that is, kind of tends to be someone special that's gritty and a little bit more of a utility player, who can kind of moonlight in some other roles, whether that's product feedback, customer success stuff. And we were really lucky to find someone great for that spot.
Yeah, for us, I would say the transition, I was terrible at sales. I mean, I was fresh out of school engineer, so I just had absolutely no idea what I was doing when it came to sales. And I really regret, if I had to go back and sort of do it over again, I think I would spend a lot more time actually asking questions about the customer, which is really the key part of a sales process, as opposed to just talking about what we do. Which is like the classic mistake that engineers make, I think. So the transition for us was pretty obvious. It was like as fast as humanly possible, let's get someone who knows how to do sales in here. Yeah, it was also a natural transition. It's a super small team. It was 4 co-founders, and salesperson was our first hire. And so that person was moonlighting in other tasks. For us, there was a really nice combination of product marketing and sales. And so basically he was responsible for the sales deck. And so he would, which is sort of product marketing, so he would talk to us on the product side, translate that into a deck, into a pitch, into messaging. And he was constantly experimenting. Like every call was a different pitch. So he was really kind of a bundle, as Raf was a bundle of product marketing and sales in one, which was actually very efficient and effective, I thought.
Christine, any thoughts on the transition, when it happens, what it looks like?
Yeah, I mean, Peter, there's a different way that engineer founders fail at that sales process, and we ask a lot of questions. But there's very much of the when you're that early and you're selling this product that is this ugly duckling thing that you can't really believe anyone would pay for. We would go to customers, they'd be using it, they'd be sending us significant volumes of data. We'd be like, okay, are you ready to pay yet? And they'd be like, okay, well, sure, maybe, but are these other features ready? And we'd go, oh no, yeah, you're right. Of course, we should absolutely, I can totally see how that's a blocker for your use case. So we also brought in a salesperson earlier than most folks would. I think we were 5 people. We brought in a salesperson, and this salesperson was very much a utility player, not very technical. And so we would pair him with one of our engineers or myself or Charity to go and talk to folks, help them get on board. And I think that it was a good move for us, certainly necessary for us. But we went through a couple iterations of what sales looked like at Honeycomb before we really hit an inflection point. And I think the key for us was finding a salesperson who was technical enough to really not have to rely on the link between our salesperson and us to translate, okay, what is this person really saying? What are the blockers really to them being able to, push this PO through? And, how reading the people and navigating that, all of which brand new for, engineering founders, and they definitely don't teach you in school.
By the way, I had the exact opposite experience, which is we thought that we would only be able to hire sales engineers because we needed technical salespeople who could really get in the weeds with our customers and understand their deep technical problems and so forth. And then our first sales rep was empowered to hire a second sales rep, and the person that he brought in was slicked back hair, Jersey Shore kind of character, not technical. And I was like, absolutely no way in hell is that ever going to work. And so I said no, and he's like, no, trust me on this. So he made the hire, and he crushed his number for 5 years. And his customers loved him, would mail him bottles of wine. I still don't fully understand exactly, this person was selling to VPs of engineering. So you wouldn't expect that this would work, but he had such a focus on helping the customer understand their problem. And even though he was non-technical, it worked super well. And that totally transformed my expectation of how we would build the sales team afterwards, which is you need a really strong SE team, but the sales reps were distinctly non-technical for us.
Switching gears a bit, a lot of you referred to kind of a self-serve motion earlier as we were introducing things. What role does that play for you today? As you invest more into enterprise selling, there's perhaps more revenue there. What role does self-serve play for you? And maybe I'll start with Christine, working backwards.
Yeah, we have a pretty non-trivial chunk of recurring revenue coming from our Pro tier. And it's been a great way for customers or prospects to self-serve a taste of what Honeycomb, the product, can do. Like most developer-facing products, our customers don't want to buy until they can try it with their own hands. And classic, they don't want to, they'd rather do as much of that trying as they can before engaging with a salesperson. And so several now of our enterprise contracts have started with a champion self-serving themselves, 2 to 5K pro account, raising a hand to upgrade, and being able to watch those upsells, even within the pro tier, help give us the ability to sort of observe developers in their natural environment, but really understand the parts of the product that indicate upsell potential and get folks excited when they switch from, okay, I just want to play with this, to, oh, I need this and I need this big.
Kobe, you talked about a similar free tier. Is a similar role for you? It sounds like there's kind of some product development benefits, but also it can feed into the higher tiers.
Yeah, it definitely can. I mean, our fastest growing tier right now is probably our team tier, which is essentially a $500 a month plan between, our free tier, which is not really designed to take something to production, and then low usage in our team tier for, call it a seed stage startup. And so generally just find that people need that tier to kind of smooth like the staircase from free to what eventually would grow into enterprise. And just having that option available, I think also feeds top of the funnel and gets people comfortable actually instrumenting the tool and going to production, because they don't feel like, hey, I hit this cliff and then I don't know what I'm going to pay. And so why would I even bother getting started in the first place?
I think the purpose of self-service for us has really changed over time. At first, it was 100% of revenue and touched 100% of the business. And then over time, that's transitioned to today. It's self-service is less than 10% of revenue and probably touches 20% of revenue on its way in. So it's meaningful for lead gen and so forth. The most important part of it today, though, is that it's a way for developers to get a sense, since developers are really involved in our sales process and involved in qualifying whether Segment is going to solve the problem for them. So it gives them a way to be involved and check things out under the hood, and it's highly differentiated. There's no one else in our space that offers free access, self-service, any of those sorts of things. So it gives us a leg up in terms of building rapport and trust with the developers that we're selling to, but it's now a really small part of revenue.
And maybe just on that, things going from a big part to a small part of your revenue, is that what you would expect? Is that ideal? Or is that just you should have gone to direct sales sooner? And,
I think it was helpful. I think it's healthy. I don't think I would have played it substantially differently if I went back to do it again.
Right.
I think it was really helpful at building sort of broad awareness. I think it was really helpful at building this trust and differentiation with respect to the developer. But also for us, the vast majority of our market lies in the enterprise. 7-figure, maybe even eight-figure deals over time. So, the total addressable market is far beyond what you can service on a self-service basis. So for us, it's naturally migrating up, and we'll continue migrating up over time.
So having characterized self-service a bit, I want to talk about kind of your direct selling, if you call that. What types of companies do you target? How long is the process to close a deal? Just so we get a feel for how the process varies between the three of you. And we can work backward from Peter.
Yeah, I guess very briefly, we don't do a lot of really great targeting today. Part of the problem that we've had is that a very, very, very broad range of companies use Segment. Like you have beer distributors, enterprise software companies, apparel companies. Like it's super, super broad, which has actually been kind of a challenge when you think about driving like an outbound motion inside a sales team, which is new for us. So we actually have a good amount of challenge there with figuring out who to target, but broadly digital businesses, and trying to figure out how to narrow that focus right now, actually.
Kobe, any comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, for us, historically there have been three really big verticals. Radar's a good fit for anybody that needs to build like a location or a digital experience in the physical world. So brick and mortar is a natural fit. QSR, shopping, anywhere where you're going to have like an in-store mode, or even thinking about companies that are investing in curbside pickup or order ahead. Historically travel has been a really huge vertical for us, thinking about things like the on-trip experience. Obviously, a lot of that is undergoing change right now, but trust and safety features for, keyless check-in. So those have been the three verticals, but, we've seen other segments tick up, things like real estate, companies like Zillow that are investing in, kind of automating the open house experience and letting you unlock and do self-tours. So anywhere where, kind of in the physical world, you would need a geofence to unlock the feature or serve the feature, is a good fit. To Peter's point, this is one of the conversations we often have between sales and marketing. And so, this is a kind of ongoing exercise for us to make sure that we get as strong of a fit as possible. But, primarily those have been the three segments that we've been biggest in.
Honeycomb being something that enables engineering teams to just do what they do, to ship quickly and reliably, our segmentation tends to be less about verticals and more about something that is much harder to determine, technical sophistication, the practices in their organization. If a company is just starting to aggregate flat file text logs, they may not be ready for us. And so a lot of us, our qualification in the sales process has been picking those things out and directing them to the appropriate educational resources if we don't think that we'll be able to make them successful at this time. As a result, a lot of what Honeycomb has done on our, I guess you could call it marketing, but education has always been a big part of how we do what we do, whether it's content, public playgrounds where you can walk through a guided tour, talks. We're constantly trying to kind of show folks what the future can look like. And what we're seeing is that, and what we've seen is that by the time folks enter our sales process, many of them have been engaging with this content for a while. If they've played with free or they've played with pro, they've essentially done their tech eval stage already. And so it's, those are all things that end up being signals rather than, whether they're in a certain industry or not.
That's interesting. It's almost like you target people who respond to you, who target you, who show some love.
For now, it's certainly something that we are constantly paying attention to, right? We can't just keep playing in the pool. We can't keep fishing out of the pool that we've created. We've got to keep making that pool bigger, inviting new folks in. And, hence our making our free tier more generous, trying to increase that reach so that more people can give it a shot.
It's interesting how it's not obvious for any of you really how to target. I mean, I guess Kobe's got a leg up in these discrete use cases among verticals, but it seems like an evolving thing to figure out, what your ideal customer looks like. Along those lines, what's the surprising thing? A lot of this is kind of very expected ways of growing the company. What did you learn in this process of kind of evolving your sales motion that you didn't expect? And I'll start with Kobe because I don't think I started with him yet.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
something to say here.
This is a tough one. That there are a few. I think when you're dealing with, some of us are definitely building new categories where I think often the line item for, geofencing or CDP can be a jump ball. You have committees where it's engineering, it's product, it's marketing, it's analytics, it's user experience. Sometimes you'll be surprised where things get funded from. So I think, in the sales process, when we're doing information gathering on how something is, how budget's getting allocated and where the check is coming from, that's constantly a learning experience. I think we're also, learning that as we release new product, some of that product is better, has different insertion points for different types of companies. Some of the products that we release are really a better fit for like a digital first company than, let's say, a more traditional enterprise company. And so, very much it's not a one size fits all every time we launch something new. And it's not a one size fits all for how something is getting funded. And so I think both of those things have been a learning process for us.
Awesome. Peter?
Yeah, for us, my biggest learning was around learning what price is possible and sort of the concept of value-based pricing. We started at $10 a month. And by the end of the first year, we had gone from $10 a month to $10,000 a month. And I think, whenever, not for everybody, but like what I thought was possible for that to be 3 orders of magnitude different, I think is a little shocking. And I actually found that price discovery, the sort of value-based sales process of like pushing for a higher price, asking the customer how they really value it, that whole motion of like, well, the price is $120K a year. And then they say, well, no, it's not worth that to me. Wow, you just unlocked actually a really key insight, or you are about to unlock a really key insight about how they actually value your product, and therefore what value they're really getting, therefore what the product should really do, how you should think about pricing metrics. Like, you're about to have a really juicy conversation. And I was so scared to put big numbers in front of people that we never really kind of got that information out. But once we did start putting those numbers out, then we started to get this really rich feedback actually about what the value was. And we discovered it was 3 orders of magnitude higher than we thought it was. And learned a lot from there. So I think having really candid conversations with customers about price and pushing the price higher and higher reveals a lot.
And Peter,
go ahead, Cody.
I was just gonna ask, what kind of things were you uncovering? Was it like, hey, this is, it's gonna save us, 2 FTEs or something like that?
Yeah, for us, what we uncovered was that it was, there were sort of 2 axes. One axis was we were saving on engineering time, like they would either have to build it or they could buy it.
Right.
And so that actually sets a limit on sort of volume-based pricing, right? If you're going to charge by API call or monthly tracked user or something like that, you can only go so high before you really have to start bending that pricing curve down, because otherwise you start exceeding the amount they're saving from an engineering team. But the second is that, if you're actually able to, in some cases, some customers are making the case more on a revenue generated side because they're enabling some use case that actually allows them to make more money, bring more users on, whatever. And in that case, you actually have a value that's scaling with the volume. And so there's actually 2 different things that you can attach to depending on the deal and depending on what the customer is doing with the product. And so that then allows you to set up packaging and different metrics and so on. But we never would have had those conversations if we hadn't pushed the price to a point where someone was like, well, hang on, like, that's not how I think about it.
Yeah, I think one of the learnings for us has been, kind of on those 2 axes, like the saving engineering hours, budget can be somewhat capped on kind of what you deem the FTE hours to be. As soon as you get to top line growth and the ROI there, that's usually where the bigger deals come. If people are bought in on, hey, this is going to power a feature that's going to yield X amount of revenue, that's going to yield, let's say, tens of millions of dollars, justifying a bigger spend is much easier than, hey, this is going to save, 2 FTEs who we've got on salary at, $200K a year. And so that's definitely been a learning for us as well.
Yeah, people chronically overestimate how productive their teams are relative to, like I've seen customers where they already have a team in place. Like there's one customer that literally had a team of 100 engineers that had built what Segment now does for them. But they had a really hard time justifying more than like 10 people as the like sort of equivalent replacement. So yeah, people chronically overestimate how productive or how underestimate how expensive it's going to be for them to build it internally. Makes it much easier to justify on the revenue side.
We've had some customers where first time we talked to them, they were, they're interested, but they're perfectly happy devoting their team of engineers to take the open source solutions and glue them together. And they, would go give conference talks about this like Rube Goldberg machine of layers of proxies that they'd had to put between Grafana and Elk and then Prometheus to like make things work. And it's a much easier conversation a couple years later when you go to them and say, okay, how many engineering hours really was that? And was that worth it? Than the estimation. But it's always better to accelerate those years in between. One thing that certainly surprised me, which again, hindsight being 20/20, should have been obvious, but hopefully this will benefit someone in the listening in. I was really surprised early on when a customer told me straight up, we trust vendors more than our own engineers. Right? Not a common mindset, but this was a customer who, different customer, struggled with turnover of their engineering team. And they'd been burned so many times by someone building something internally and then being lured away by another company and their existing team not being able to maintain this custom thing that had been built. And that, now having learned a lot about what mature customer success organizations look like and how much of a partner we could be, I totally get it, but hearing that for the first time was a real shock as an engineer who thought she could build anything.
It's interesting because I feel like I'm hearing that in the self-serve channel, you'll learn all this stuff about the product. And in your direct sales channel, you'll learn all this stuff about the value and where it's hidden and how to price it and what customers are looking for. And maybe without both of them, you would kind of miss some signal in some way. Going back into this, I think, Peter, you alluded to this earlier, how you moved up in price, kind of digging into this selling motion and how you determine price. At what point did you see major increases in the value customers are willing to pay, and how did you get there?
So I think, let's see, in the first year, yeah, we went from charging nothing to, I think the largest contract we'd signed was about 50K. And so that was a really big ramp in value. And then we kind of noticed that the value started to tail off at that time around like 100 to 200K. And then it took us, shipped a bunch of stuff that kind of like solidified that value, grew the number of companies that were happy to pay in that price range. And then it's only in the last like 2-3 years that we started jumping up a new layer into the 7-figure deals. And those were really driven for us by launching a new product called Personas. So the core product is about data routing and moving data between different places. Personas then takes that data and structures it into customer profiles that you can build audiences on top of. And the first product really solves that engineering problem of like, how can I not have my engineers spending time on this? The second product, Personas, actually starts to get at the revenue ROI, where it's like, okay, now I can build audiences, I can drive marketing campaigns, I can deliver revenue that I couldn't deliver before. And so that unlocks actually this much different kind of scaling motion on value. So they're sort of on two different value curves. So that has sort of transformed our sales process, especially in the enterprise.
Christine or Kobe, either of you have some thoughts on when there was like an inflection in the change in price you could charge and what drove it?
Yeah, I'll go first. Our early conversations for this first couple of years it was all very engineer to engineer, right? That was our marketing strategy. We could get these technical folks, we could show them and talk to them about what Honeycomb could do. But we started to run into this wall as our champions were unable to get their bosses on board or their boss's boss, and bringing on kind of really leveling up how we thought about marketing, coming across as more polished, talking about value, being able to learn the language of talking ROI. Like these are things that we were doing on the sales side, but not kind of reflecting on the marketing side. And that, as well as the overall conversation around observability maturing, was much more impactful around on our ACV than pricing or what we were doing in the sales process itself.
I think for us, we had I think it was a month about 2 years ago where we had two fairly big pilots. One was like a very formal RFP process. And in both pilots, when we got down to pricing, we came in higher than our competitors. And we just sort of held firm. And we held firm because the technical decision was Radar in both. And we felt that we were worth more. And we kind of coached our champions there up and said like, hey, we're going to be more expensive, tell procurement. And we ended up winning both of those customers. I think the price maybe came down a little bit, but it wasn't the type of thing where we felt like we had to undercut the competitor or match it. And we wanted to hold firm on a premium, mostly to have a delta and kind of highlight the value of the technology. So I think that was like a turning point for us where we almost started to believe like, hey, we can capture more revenue and it's worth that. And if we have the technical decision, that's really what we need to focus on. And that'll hold the price point up.
Awesome. We've talked a bit about, charging more and more and getting bigger direct sales deals. But we've also talked about kind of landing logos and self-serve and then growing accounts. On the growing front, for those of you doing this, how do you grow an account? Like what's the resources you bring to bear to nurture somebody to raise ACV over time?
We thought that customer success would be the answer here, and I think a really great customer success manager does this, at least in a B2B context, where like the customer success manager is helping them solve the problem. I think what I'm learning now, as we've matured a bit, is that actually professional services is an even better answer to this. And this is coming from someone where like the concept of professional services was pretty anathema, right? We're like, no, come on, a developer signs up and they install it themselves. Like, get over yourself. You don't need any professional services to get this thing up and running. It's super easy. But you go to an enterprise, like we had this one customer that signed up 3 years ago. They're paying us $800K a year, and we like sold them the contract. And then like 2 months later, they still hadn't installed. They weren't collecting any data. And I was like, okay, come on, this is not that hard. So I flew out to Chicago, went over to their office, and they're like, oh, how many people do you think there are here? And I was like, oh, I think I looked it up on LinkedIn. I think there's like 800 people in this office. So like, surely someone can install the JavaScript, right? And he's like, well, how many engineers do you think we have? And I was like, I don't know, maybe like 200. And he's like, Peter, I have 3. And this is like a major retailer. So like they have 3 engineers to maintain an entire e-commerce stack, to maintain all the like ERP system, like everything, 3 engineers. And then some like consultants, of course, but like there is no capability. They just literally do not have the bandwidth or the capability to go install something like this. As a result, that was a really fraught account. It took a really long time for us to get that account to a healthy spot. And that's exactly the kind of account that in the enterprise really needs professional services. And so a model that we're just starting to learn more about and starting to deploy is where for those sorts of customers, we sell in an architect full-time for a year to go help them get set up. And that person goes and gets them set up and then goes and does the discovery work of like, hey, did you know if you install Segment over here, you'll get this benefit? And they're like, okay, cool, go do it. Boom, expansion. And that person, like you basically generate like a wake of SaaS revenue off the back of a services person who is going and doing the successful installations and proofs of concept and so forth, because they don't have the capability internally to actually write that code. So anyways, that can be a very effective, it's totally backwards from how I previously thought about the world, but from what I'm seeing so far and what I've seen at other companies, I think it can be super effective.
The nice thing about that too is, if you have someone at your company installing it, it's, the implementation is going to be clean and sound and done right. And so I think there's something to be said for that.
All of the above, all of these things are things that Honeycomb is just at the stage of starting to explore. Up until 2 months ago, we had 1 customer success person. Scaling him is going to be a key challenge for us over the next couple of years. I think that a lot of our expansion has been despite that 1 person being spread very thin. But we've been able to leverage, leveraging our content, leveraging our community. We have a huge Slack community where active customers share tips, talk through problems, troubleshoot things together. It's share war stories and kind of success stories. It has been a great way to sort of keep up momentum and engage those really interested champions, so that even if they're fighting the good fight inside their organization, they have comrades that they can talk to and share ideas with.
So we're going to transition, not yet, but soon, to kind of audience questions. But there was a couple topics we brought up earlier. I think some of you had stories or things you wanted to get to on those topics that we didn't quite get to. So I want to give you kind of open mic if there's anything you want to jump into. Otherwise, I have one last question. We talked a little bit about pricing and mostly about just the scale of pricing, raising prices. But actually figuring out how to price. Do you price competitive to what's in your industry, or do you kind of create your own pricing? And how does that allow you to raise prices? Is kind of an interesting topic. Christine, any thoughts on this? I can start with you and work backward.
Yeah, when we started late 2015, early 2016, all of the incumbents in the space, New Relic, Datadog, Splunk, were pricing on things like host names. And if you remember that time, this was also when containers were taking the world by storm, and Terraform was the new hotness. And there was one day when Charity was spinning up and down clusters, just playing with this new toy, and would cycle through like hundreds of host names over the course of a day by accident. And so there were, I think from day one, it was really clear to us that we wanted to align our pricing with the way that the infrastructure was going, that where these trends that were emerging in how people built their software systems was going to have to define what we would be friendly towards, what would be kind of totally agnostic towards. Like, Honeycomb, we don't care if you have 1 million hosts or 10 hosts, we care about the volume of data you're sending us. And as we've evolved, we actually just went through we redid our pricing in May with an eye towards aligning it a little bit more closely with our costs, always good, but making it as easy as possible for a prospect to figure out for themselves what a contract, what a contract size might look like, how that contract might change as they grow. Predictability did become and is much less of a problem now because we want folks to be able to land and expand with us, and if they're doing well, we want to do well also.
Probably most of us here have some blend of volume-based pricing, maybe like platform fees for different parts of the product, and then support, professional services, things of that nature. I think, for us, we have a lot of people who've never bought a geofencing platform before. So that's sort of like a foreign and new line item. And I often think about, when we're not in the room, how does our champion explain this to their boss or their sponsor about how the pricing works? And if it's kind of convoluted and it's hard for her or him to explain it, it's going to be too hard to get the deal done. So I think picking a metric that is easy to forecast when you can say, hey, once this is deployed to production, we have a sense of, how many users have an app installed or how many users visit a website per month. That's easy. Things like monthly active users or things every PM at a company knows. When you start kind of getting into exercises where people have to back into, well, how many calls or how many events do you think you're going to generate? That's where I think sometimes things can get a little bit trickier. And so for us, we've just tried to keep it really simple with a kind of volume-based monthly tracked user pricing. And then, on our new geo APIs for basically a bunch of search use cases, API calls. So that's how we've gone about it. I think the biggest thing is it's got to be really simple for whoever your champion is to, just to quickly summarize, easy for your champion to explain it for budget approvals, whatever that key metric is going to be.
I think there's a few different parts of pricing that are important and solved differently. I think there's packaging, which is really understanding who your buyer personas are and which features and subset of your platform is applicable to which use cases or which types of buyers, which stage of companies, et cetera. That's something that I think you can probably figure out by just talking to a few customers yourself and writing it down and thinking it through from first principles and validating that with a few customer conversations, even existing customer conversations. And if you get the packaging wrong, people will think that your pricing is too expensive because they're like, oh, there's a bunch of stuff here that I don't want. So it's like, it's too expensive. So getting packaging right is important. The second one is what's the pricing metric? So like within those plans, usually you'll have something that like escalates with usage or some proportion of it that is modulated depending on how much they're using the product. Often it could be seats or API calls, things like that. Figuring out that metric is something that we ended up hiring Simon Kucher and later PwC to run really like crazy surveys, and they have specialized teams in this. Costs a fortune, like multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's just not a specialty that we build in-house because it's infrequent. And then the third is what is the actual price point that you put on it? And that's really a question of like, what's the value and how differentiated is that value? And if you're sufficiently differentiated from the other products in the space, then you'll be able to charge based on value. And if you're not sufficiently differentiated, then you'll be charged based on competition. And you'll be forced to look at it from more a cost perspective. So as long as you're able to maintain a really differentiated position, then you can just look at value. But I think each of those three things has like different ways that you arrive at it. For us, we have always focused on charging based on the value. And so even with competitors in the space today, we just hold really strong to charging on the value and end up charging sometimes 3 to 5 or even 10x more than some of the competitors. And keeping enough differentiation in the product in order to maintain that price difference is really important.
Awesome. I turned out I have time for just one more, and I wanted to slip in. I know there's a lot of talk among startups and venture around communities and developing communities and their role in selling. We've talked about self-serve, but I'm curious if your kind of user communities are the people that end up buying more from you, or is this kind of a different group that serves some other purpose? And kind of where your early champions of the product, the people who are kind of now your more lucrative customers. Any thoughts on the role community has played in your companies? And we'll keep it short.
I'll defer to Kobe and Christine. We actually haven't put a ton of effort into building a community per se.
We have a really thriving community. And honestly, I think our community today are more people who want to buy, but haven't yet playing around with the free tier. And it's a great pool of people to keep engaged.
Awesome. Kobe, anything to add?
I think for us, it's sort of brand and it's our free tier. So, it's not something that we're monetizing, but it's people we want to be really happy and support us and, help build the brand.
Great. Thank you all for entertaining my questions.